As the death toll continues to rise in the Middle East, defense contractors are very excited about the business opportunities that this war is presenting. Now, during the third quarter earnings call this month, analysts from Morgan Stanley and TD Bank discussed the earnings benefits of a continued conflict between Israel and Hamas. This is according to a report in The Guardian. In the call, TD Cowen's Kai von Rumor, managing director and senior research analyst specializing in the aerospace industry, asked about how the war will affect his holdings in General Dynamics, an aerospace and weapons company in which TD Asset Management holds over $16 million worth in stocks. So, as we know, of course, Biden has asked Congress for an additional $106 billion in military and humanitarian aid for Israel and Ukraine, and humanitarian assistance for Gaza. Some of that money, or I should say the majority of that money, is probably going to go to weapons, defense contractors, and that's why it's being seen as a potential boom for the aerospace and weapons sector. They have already, since that announcement, enjoyed a 7 percentage point jump in the value of their stocks in the immediate aftermath of Hamas's October 7th attack on Israel and the beginning of Israel's bombardment of Gaza in response. In this call on October 25th, so it was last week, von Rumor said, quote, Hamas has created additional demand. We have this $106 billion request from the president. Can you give us some general color in terms of areas where you think you could see incremental acceleration in demand? Jason Aiken, the company's executive vice president of technologies and chief financial officer, responded to that question saying, quote, you know, the Israel situation is obviously a terrible one. Frankly, and one that's just evolving as we speak. But I think if you look at the incremental demand potential coming out of that, the biggest one to highlight, and that really sticks out, is probably on the artillery side. So, meaning like, we see a lot of growth in artillery, meaning, of course, they're going to need more artillery pieces, or artillery ammunition, which, again, is going to be used to bomb the crap out of Gaza and be used against people. So the next day, of course, von Rumor assigned a buy rating to General Dynamics stock. Then you have Morgan Stanley's head of aerospace and defense equity research, Kristen Lewig, who took a similar approach to the conflict during Raytheon's 24th of October earnings call. Here's what she said. Looking at the White House's $106 billion supplemental funding request, you've got equipment for Ukraine, air and missile defense for Israel, and replenishment of stockpiles for both. And it seems, to fit quite nicely with the Raytheon defense portfolio, said Lewig, whose employer holds over $3 billion in Raytheon stock, a 2.1% ownership share of the weapons company. So, how much of this opportunity is addressable to the company? And if the dollars are appropriated, when would the earliest you could see this convert to revenue? Greg Hayes, Raytheon's chairman and executive director, responded, I think really across the entire Raytheon portfolio, you're going to see a benefit of this restocking on top of what we think is going to be an increase in the DoD top line budget. So more defense spending, more money going to war for this restocking, which again, these executives can't wait. When are we going to see the revenue? When are we going to see the monies, huh? When is it going to come into our pockets? Yeah. This is quite literally disgusting. You have people that are sitting here just waiting to see profit from what is going to lead to the deaths of people, children. Again, this is opportunity for revenue on the graves of dead children. Since October 7th, more than 3,257 children have been reported killed, including at least 3,195 in Gaza 33 in the West Bank, and 29 in Israel, according to the Ministries of Health in Gaza and Israel, respectively. So, dead children. Oh, there's also that little thing about war crimes, which we're not technically supposed to, support, especially, companies, banks, money, etc. But let's be honest, that's what we're doing right now. Just 3 days into the Israel-Hamas war, the UN Human Rights Council issued a warning that, quote, there's already clear evidence that war crimes may have been committed in the latest explosion of violence in Israel and Gaza, and all those who violated international law, targeted civilians, must be held accountable for their crimes. The UN Independent International Commission of Inquiry on the Occupied Palestinian Territory, including East Jerusalem and Israel, said on Monday. The commission has been collecting and preserving evidence of war crimes committed by all sides since this had begun on October 7th, when Hamas launched a complex attack on Israel, and Israeli forces responded with airstrikes in Gaza. This is the Human Rights Council, assessment shared by Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch. So there are war crimes that are going on right now, and these companies are like, yes, 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 but where's the revenue potential here? We're waiting to see the revenue potential from this massive allocation of money that is going to go into buying weapons from us. Weapons, arms, ammunition, restocking. This is gross. As Eli Clifton points out in his piece in The Guardian, the comments are seemingly in contradiction of each company's statement on human rights. Yeah, well, come on. You really expect a company whose entire purpose is to create weapons of war and then to sell them? You think they're going to be concerned about human rights? Human rights. Come on, guys. Really? Apparently, though, they had statements on human rights and also, as Clifton says, explicit endorsements of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and UN guiding principles on business and human rights. It is in violation of all of those things. In fact, that's the Morgan Stanley's statement on human rights says this: we exercise our influence by conducting our business operations in ways that seek to respect, protect, and promote the full range of human rights, such as those described in the UN's Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Although we believe that governments around the world bear primary responsibility for safeguarding human rights, we acknowledge the corporate responsibility to respect human rights articulated in the UN's guiding principle on business and human rights. Okay. Yeah, again, there's no way for that business to, respect human rights if they are invested in these weapons manufacturers. There's just no way, because, again, these weapons manufacturers exist for one reason: to create weapons and then to sell those weapons. And they're right now, unless there's a country that has been barred by the U.S., for whatever reason, right? Oh, you support terrorists, you did this, you did that, whatever. Well, then these companies are going to sell weapons to them. We're selling weapons to Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia, they murdered a reporter. And not just murdered, they cut him up and stuffed him in a suitcase. We're selling weapons to those guys, to the Saudis, and we haven't stopped. And by the way, while at the same time, Saudi Arabia has engaged in a genocide in Yemen against the Houthis. And so, no problems with that. We have no problem there because we're, friends with the Saudis and everything because of oil. But hey, we really believe in human rights. We have so much respect for human rights. Oh, yes. Look, there's more. TD, by the way, these are just financial institutions. TD's commitment to respect to human rights is made in accordance with the corporate responsibility to respect human rights as set out in the UN's guiding principles on business and human rights, says TD's statement on human rights. Since 2018, we've been undertaking a review of our current practices and procedures and continue working towards integrating the UNGP across the bank. Except that they're obviously not, because here you have both TD and Morgan Stanley officials that are like, okay, but what about the profit, guys? Oh, we see opportunity in this Israel-Hamas conflict. So you know what I'm saying? So where's that money? Where's that money? Give me the money already. Look, these statements obviously show that corporations don't care about human rights. Of course they don't. These corporations, they're not human. Of course not. They are machines created for the sole purpose of making profit, and they have a fiduciary responsibility to maximize that profit. And yes, that's for the shareholders who are, by the way, humans, CEO human. But again, the entire structure of corporation is just a legal fiction. And so that corporation, runs all the humans and says like, no, this is what I am. This is what I am made for, to maximize profit. And if you do not maximize profit, we have things in place that will allow us to get rid of the human and to replace it with one who will maximize profit. So, you know, talk about the machines taking over. That pretty much is what happened with corporations. And it's, instead of an evil AI, it's just a calculator, basically. Look, these companies, defense industry, of course, it gets more profitable when it comes to wars. And then if you're a bank and you're investing in these weapons manufacturers that are doing great, well, then you're going to do better. And then what's your incentive? It's incentives and disincentives, right? The incentive is support more wars, because then our profits go up. That's it. And look, when it comes to, especially in the United States, where the defense, budget, and it's a misnomer to call it the defense budget, honestly, but this, budget, the Pentagon, it keeps getting funded no matter who's in office, whatever party. You have Republicans in office, it grows. You have Democrats in office, it grows. It doesn't matter at this point who's, running the show, because the defense industry will continue to get bigger and bigger and funded more and more. That's it. That's the reality here. There's always more funding. There's always more money for war. And it doesn't matter who's doing the dying, whether it be Israelis, Palestinians, Jews, Muslims, Christians. It doesn't matter, as long as these companies get paid. That's all they care about. And the reason that I'm saying this is because I want to point out the sicknesses in our system. This is the military and industrial complex. This is what was warned against. And of course, what did we do? Didn't listen to it. The generations before us didn't listen to it. They instead took the military industrial complex warning and turned it into a guidebook and said, oh, you know what? That actually does sound pretty good. Yeah. And then we're going to get extremely rich. And that's exactly what happened. Look, the United States, as a result of this military industrial complex, we're the #1 arms dealer in the world, which is why we're ignoring the UN, by the way, because the UN, says a bunch of things, especially about, the illegal settlements in Palestinian areas, and about all this stuff, how banks aren't supposed to fund, human rights abuses, but of course we know they are, because there's a big old loophole for these corporations to come in and do whatever they want. In fact, according to Shannon Marshall, an expert on finance and arms trade and the associate director of the Institute for Middle East Studies at George Washington University, quote, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is only as good as how it's interpreted by the host government, which in this case would be the United States. These analysts can feel safe in the knowledge that the U.S. government is never going to interpret that law in such a way that they will be prevented from exporting weapons to a country that the U.S. doesn't have an outright embargo on, which probably won't have anything to do with human rights laws anyways. So again, using human rights as an excuse, they never will. They never will. They don't actually care about human rights. No, it's all about selling weapons. It's all about money. That's it. This is the result of money in politics. It is the cancer in our system. It is the sickness. Defense contractors pay our politicians. Politicians will then push for more and more funding for defense contractors. And so we'll just ignore international law because it doesn't matter. And by the way, it's also why we don't push for peace. Do you know that most of Congress hasn't pushed for a ceasefire? Of course not. Why would they? When it's so lucrative for our defense contractors that buy all of our politicians. Instead, we're going to continue to send more and more weapons into the area, which is not a good thing. It's never a good thing. And it's just going to mean more and more death. But for them, for the companies, more and more death, it just means more and more profit.